Hello, let me just sort out the stream on Instagram and we'll be all done. Here we go, live. Okay, hopefully this will all work. Great. Well, it's great to be back. Hello, and yeah, thank you for joining me again this week. I decided that this week we'd talk about how we fail. And I know it sounds a bit negative, and I know so I don't know how it was for you growing up or as you started working, but people used to always focus on the positives, and we were encouraged not to focus on the negatives. So sort of focusing on the negative feels a bit weird, I'll be honest. But I think that sometimes when we focus on the positives all the time and we never talk about the negatives, I think it can sometimes get us into this spiral of putting out only positive things and talking about only positive things, and therefore people who've experienced the negative stuff, as we all do, often feel even worse about feeling that negativity, or that haven't done something, or haven't managed to do something, or haven't finished something. So I think it's really important to talk about when things don't work out, and so I'm going to do my best as well to give you, sort of things from my life where they haven't worked out, and I'll use that as a starting point. I got some great comments about this, which I'll also look at as well, and I will do my best to combine everything together so that we can just take the discussion a bit further forward and see how we can acknowledge the negatives, accept what they are, and then turn things around and actually make positives and learn from the negatives, right? I mean, as human beings, I think it's important that we do recognize where things go wrong so that we can turn things around. So hello to you all joining now, and had a question here asking if I can speak Italian. Yes, I can speak Italian. In fact, my university degree is partly in Italian. I did a degree in combined languages, French, Spanish, Italian, and Portuguese. So yes, I can speak Italian. Now, in terms of the things that I got through, I'm just going to read them out very quickly because I think that they're really good insights, and we'll come back to some of these definitely. Some of the comments that I got were why we fail. Okay, this is from you, so thank you for sharing these. Insufficient output practice, so we're not actually doing enough practicing of the language. When we don't have clear goals, so a question came of how do we actually establish clearly defined goals, and then we have because you don't believe that you can actually achieve your goals, so you believe you sort of almost, you basically torpedo your own success by not believing enough in yourself. A lack of self-discipline is another reason that I got, which all of these I agree with, by the way. I think that they're very good, because people focus often on grammar too much and look at the rules and not really the application to language. I think that can actually also be true. Because if we stop learning the language, we stop learning the language. Absolutely. And because the system or method is not enjoyable enough, and again, true. And because you like the idea of learning a language, but when it comes to the real deal, maybe you give up. And there's truth in all of that. So I'm going to talk from my own experience so that you can sort of relate, hopefully, with what I say. I've had a number of times where it hasn't gone quite right, or I haven't finished learning a language to the point that I actually hoped that I would. And I think probably the very first thing that we should talk about is goals. So why we want to learn a language and what the goal of learning is. So I believe that it's really good to be quite sort of have a firm idea in your head as to what you want to achieve. So are you doing it for a certain period of time? How many hours do you have in a day? What kind of sort of level do you want to get at by the end of a certain period? Do you have goals that you set in between? So it's not just sort of like, I want to speak Italian, or I want to speak German, or I want to speak Estonian, or whatever it is. It's, I want to be able to talk about my friends and family by the end of 2 weeks, or 3 weeks, or a month, or 2 months, whatever the goal is. And the goal that you set would also depend on how much actual free time you have. If you have 5 kids at home, you work a full-time job, and you need to do all the housework and lots of other things, perhaps setting a goal of doing 4 or 5 hours of study a day is not going to be realistic. Um, if you know that you've got a number of other projects on the go, or you've got a number of other languages you're studying, again, as soon as you start dividing your time, when you add a language, you know how much time you have. So one of the things that I notice with people is that when they fail at learning a language, what they do is they bite off more than they can chew. So typical thing would be, and this is what I did last year, I decided with very good intentions that I was going to start learning some Basque. And I had a Basque teacher on italki, and I really wanted to learn it. And it's still a language on my language learning list. I would love to learn Basque at some point. But Basque is a language that requires quite a lot of effort. And typically, when you know that a language is very different to the other languages you already speak, you have to also factor in that, first of all, progress is going to be slower than with a language that's already related to a language that you speak, just because you need time to not only learn the grammar, but internalize it, to be able to use it in a very sort of automatic way. And also the same thing goes for vocabulary. It takes time to really get that vocabulary in your head. And so what I did with Basque is I started doing it thinking I could just do it as a fun side thing. But what happened was, um, I sort of did okay in the first few lessons, and I sort of built up a bit of Basque, okay? And then I kind of got to this point, which is, I think, what we talk about as being like sort of chapter 3 syndrome, where you get to a point in your language learning, and then all of a sudden you realize, actually, I need to do a lot more for this to move forward. It's not just going to be like basic phrases and stuff. It's actually a lot more effort and work. And it was a lot more work and effort than I actually had time to devote to. So what happened was, I was just going to these lessons. I didn't want to give up because I thought, I don't like giving up. I was being a bit stubborn about it. But this is a typical thing that we can do, where we get into this idea of, I want to do it, I want to carry on doing it. But what we do is we end up making ourselves sick of the language, right? So fortunately, for the Basque language, I didn't get sick of the language, but I think my teacher got sick of me, because I was going to the lesson, and she was actually really well organized and she was well structured. But um, because she saw that it wasn't sort of, I wasn't devoting the time that I needed to do it, I think she felt a bit, oh, okay, this isn't really going very far. And I think possibly she'd hoped that maybe it would go a bit further than it did in terms of the language learning, and it really didn't. And so I kind of just accepted, okay, this isn't gonna work. And so uh, I mean, she had a natural break coming up with a project anyway, and we just kind of had a break. And I will go back to it at some stage, but this is where, when you don't do something regularly, or you don't actually have the real time to do it because you have other things to do, this is where you can end up failing at learning a language. So for me, I failed at learning Basque at that point. Now, I want to preface all of this and say, when I say I failed at learning Basque, that doesn't mean that I will fail in the future at learning Basque, or um, it's only that time, that one time. And all of the failures and all of the things that we don't do and don't achieve right now can still be achievable later. Okay, so just to sort of put that out there, I don't believe that when you can't do something once, you can never do it. The The other thing that can happen is that you can fall in love with a language or something because you meet people you like, you really enjoy it, and you sort of get into it. But then you realize that just there's so much to do to actually move forward, like I did in Basque as well. So it can be time things, it can be actually effort things that you think, okay, well, actually, do you know what? I started learning this right now. My brain's not there at the moment. My head's not there. I don't have the space in my life. I don't have the time to devote to this. And so you stop. And it's probably a good thing to stop at that point, because I think actually failing and stopping can sometimes be positive, because if we look at them, those sort of those times in our lives when that happens, and we look objectively and we rationalize what we've done wrong and what our situation is, we can get rid of the blame. So there's no blame involved here. This is just the way things are, and we weren't at the right space. So if that happens to you, park what happened, stop it, put it in a box, accept that it happened, acknowledge that it happened, and acknowledge the reasons why it happened, and agree with yourself that you will leave it and park it and just move on with something else. And you may come back to it later. Hey, you may even not, you may never come back to it, but at least you've sort of fenced it off, you've parked that problem, you know what happened, you acknowledged it, and you just moved on. So that's one of the first things that that I noticed myself that I've had problems with. Um, Last year, I started doing studying two languages, and one was Cornish and one was Gaelic. Now, I got to the end of an academic year in both languages, and Cornish I could communicate my ideas in, and Gaelic I couldn't. Now, with my Cornish teacher, we were definitely moving in a very, we want to produce language to communicate ideas and talk about things with other people. For Gaelic, it was more about sort of looking at the history of the language and the poetry and stuff that's attached to the language. We looked at a lot of poetry, and so I got to a point with it where I decided, okay, I'm not actually feeling that I'm making much progress in terms of actually being able to actively speak this language. But I was enjoying the lessons for what the lessons were. So instead of treating it as a language learning thing, I treated it as a cultural and linguistic experience. So I reframed my Gaelic study, my Scottish Gaelic study. I reframed it. And it's important to recognize when you can reframe your learning. So not all learning has to have the same goals in mind. You don't have to become super fluent, or being able to even speak it to an intermediate level, or to even a high basic level at the end of your studies. If you are happy with the reframing of maybe previous goals, that's fine too. And as long as you're happy with it, nobody else really has the right to to decide whether or not that's successful or not. That's for you to decide, because no one has that knowledge in their heads except for you. Um, and so with Gaelic, I reframed it. So now, a year after studying Gaelic, I can't really say very much of anything. But but I did have the experience of going through the grammar and listening to poetry and discussing that kind of interesting cultural aspect of the language. And I do feel that I got something out of that year because I reframed my goals. With Cornish, I had a very clear goal. I was going to do the grade one exam. So there was an exam to work towards. And if I'm honest with myself as well about reframing my goals, I knew that I would have to do quite a lot of things with Gaelic that I wasn't doing, and I wasn't potentially having that backed up with what I was doing in class either. So I would have needed to have done a lot more independent study as well. And then the independent study would have jarred with doing the kind of poetry type stuff that I was doing in class. So I decided that's why I reframed it. With Cornish, I started joining, I went to an intensive weekend for Cornish that was online, and I also started doing conversation classes. So all of that kind of helped me with Cornish to get into the language, into using it, into communicating through it. And because of that, for me, that was quite a big success in terms of like language learning in an active way. It wasn't a very fast process. I mean, I got to kind of an A2 level at the end of an academic year, which is what, 8, 9 months, which may seem quite a long time, but I think it's a realistic time in terms of picking up the base vocabulary and stuff. It's taking it quite slowly, but I also had work to do and I had other projects on, so it felt like the right tempo. So this is why I say it's always very, very good to make sure when you have goals in mind and the goals are quite clear, you allow yourself the time that you need to do what you want to do. And if you allow yourself also to reframe those goals, it helps you to retain motivation. Where I've seen this fall down quite badly is when people join classes and then they realize they can't do them anymore, or they, for example, just there's too much involved and they don't have the spare time anymore. And when you have a class going on, it can feel, if the class hasn't changed, sort of if the class isn't what you thought it would be, and the class does move on and your life changes, then it can make it quite difficult and quite, yeah, unsatisfying, I guess, to carry on, to carry on with it. Um, so yeah, I see a question here. I will definitely get to the questions. Yeah, you're interested in the Gaelic and studying German at the end, but use phrases in the Netherlands. Having to, okay, because I need to, yeah. Reframing is a really good way of sort of helping to retain motivation and also accept what's not what you expected. It's actually quite, I think psychologically it's quite an important thing to do, and I use that all the time. Um, Sometimes I have projects that I start and I, for other reasons, I'm like, okay, it's just not what I thought it would be, or the situation changes. So, for example, I've started learning Arabic 3 times in my life. Each time, the need to use it, my initial reason to learn it, went away. And it was very difficult to retain the motivation. When one time it was a job, another time it was studies at university in Damascus, and all of the reasons I was learning it to go and do these different things just went away, and not through any fault of my own. It was just they went away, but it was then difficult to retain sort of the desire or the motivation to carry on with the studies, especially because other things came into my life that had to take precedence because the situation had changed. So, carrying on with Arabic, which is quite a big thing to take on, was no longer an option. And that happened. And also, other things that can happen like that are you start doing something and it doesn't become, or it isn't what you think it's going to be. So, for example, the same thing happened to me with Georgian. I thought that the Georgian script was absolutely beautiful, and it is. And I started learning Georgian at university in Sweden, in Malmö. And I got to the end of my course and I started the second course as well. Um, so I sort of did Georgian for 1 academic year, and I just didn't feel like I was getting very far. And I think part of it was because it was difficult to memorize the words because the words were very different, and also a lot of consonant clusters, and so sometimes that kind of thing can also demotivate you and make you feel like, okay, I don't know if I'm going to get any further with it. And I kind of felt that with Georgian. The other thing with Georgian that was a problem was I wasn't hearing it used ever. And this is many, many years ago, before the idea of like listening to the internet radio was like quite easy to do. It wasn't that simple to do at that point. And so it just didn't work. So I ended up putting that on hold too. And so there are a number of languages like that where I've had those experiences of, okay, this is just isn't working right now, or something changed. Um, and again, when that happens, it's another time to reframe and not just that language, but also generally for your life. You reframe your position and what you're doing and why you're doing it. The a thing happened as well when COVID happened. I had started learning Persian, and I wanted to learn Persian. I still do want to learn Persian. But when COVID struck, I was faced with all of these opportunities to explore lots of different languages I wouldn't normally get to explore. And because I've been working on the Polyglot Conference for a while now, and a big focus for me has sort of been this endangered, indigenous, and vulnerable languages. And a number of those types of languages came up as courses that I could do online for the first time. And I really felt that that was more important to prioritize over a language like Persian, because Persian there are lots of materials for, and there are lots of great people you can talk to, and so it feels like, also it's an Indo-European language, so it's a lot more similar to some of these other languages, and there are way more resources for it. So it felt like the right time to reframe my goals, and so I did. I just stopped, and this is the thing, I think, that many times when people fail at learning languages is that they feel that they've completely failed. And this is where I say failing in itself is actually fine and human and normal, and absolutely everyone trips over at some point. Everyone. I mean, if you're out there and you think you don't, okay, then you're like superhuman. I mean, seriously. So it happens, right? And the key to not letting a stumble or a fall ruin the whole thing is to get up and to just really get into understanding the whys and the wherefores, and read them reframing things and moving on. So they're my kind of key things to do. In terms of practical things where people don't succeed in terms of learning languages, there are many practical things why people don't manage to learn. One can be materials, as was mentioned in the comments. Absolutely. So if you've got materials that just don't gel with you or work for you, that can be really challenging. So I always say it's good to look at a lot of different resources so that you can see what works and what really speaks to you. Because if you have materials that you find boring, you're not going to want to go back to them to study every day. And you do need to do that pretty much every day if you want to learn a language. And so sometimes I feel that that is a big problem for a lot of people, and there's a kind of an internal pressure of, well, I started this now and I should finish it, and if I don't finish it, I leave it on the shelf, and if I leave it on the shelf and I don't touch it, then I failed. Then it basically, the book then, or the course, screams at you like, you failed, you failed, you failed. And you see it every day, but you know you haven't touched it, and the more that goes on, the worse it feels. So acknowledge it, reframe it. Again, go back to why it's not working. Reframe why it's not working. It's the book. I hate the book. I absolutely hate the book. So I'm going to get a new book. I'm going to get a new course. I'm going to find a new teacher. It could be the teacher. It could be the book. It could be something. It's just not working for you. So don't allow that to get in the way of your goal. Reframe it. Maybe the goal might have to change as well, but definitely the materials will have to change to make sure that you want to pick them up and you want to get into them. Then this is the really important one that I find people don't do. It's actually studying and using the language on a daily basis. Now, if you don't do anything with the language at all, you're not magically going to start speaking or using or understanding the language. The words aren't going to fly into your head because you saw them once on a page. I have to see and hear and use words many, many times before they feel that they're automatic. And language learning is about making words and language automatic, that you use them almost without thinking, right? If you don't do anything, you're not going to get anything. You know, if you don't put anything in, you're not going to get anything out, is the key thing. It's not about osmosis. If you sit and even if you just put the TV on in the background, it's okay, but it's not exactly the same. It needs to be, as Stephen Krashen and Steve Kaufman always say, comprehensible input, something that's actually going to make sense. If you're just beginning now to learn Arabic, or for me with Korean, yeah, I might get a little bit out of it. I'm not going to say I won't get anything out of it, but I'm not going to get the same if I just watch Netflix in Korean or Arabic. That's not going to really do it for me completely, because I still don't know how to say I want coffee with milk, or you know what I mean? I mean, if I'm at that base level, watching a Netflix show and then reading the subtitles and like letting it's good to have the sound go over you for the rhythm of the language and the pronunciation, and to feel that kind of the melody of the language. But in terms of producing language and actually speaking and using it and understanding it, it's not necessarily going to make a huge difference, because hey, if we could just watch something, and that's all we did, then it would. I mean, I'm not saying that it won't happen eventually. You might, well, if you really love something, like people learn Japanese through manga and they absolutely love it, so they do tend to do quite well with it, and it does help. But you do need to do something actively every day to do it. You need to think about the language, to consider it. The language needs to be part of you, part of your being, part of your essence, part of your life, part of your world. And there are ways to do that, and that's sort of kind of social media, following people on social media who use the language, teach the language, so that you get it whenever you open your phone and you don't have to make an effort. The thing is, as human beings, our natural instinct is to kind of just do what's easy, to pick the easy road, right? And that's because we have a lot of other things to do. It's not because we're awful people or we're totally lazy. It's because it's the easy option when things sometimes can already be very difficult. And so if you allow yourself to at least make the most of those times by following people on social media, where you're gonna check your phone anyway, it definitely will help you to at least get some of that language. But then also, in addition to that, you do need to sort of review things. I always say, make sure you make time in your calendar. So whether it's 15, 20, 30 minutes, an hour each day, just enough to be able to do a little bit every single day, will be a big help. It could just be reviewing words that you've already done during a lesson. It could be just listen to the dialogue again and read with it. It could be that you actually do an exercise. It could be many things that you could do just to sort of help you, writing things out. It could be anything. Mix it up. Do what you feel like doing that works for you, but make sure you do it before you do other tasks. If you say that you're going to do it after other tasks at the end of the day, you'll get to the end of the day and you'll be too tired. So make sure you do it before other tasks. That's kind of one of the big tricks, I think, that doing things before something else. And put it in your calendar. Make the time, actually make the time. Make yourself unavailable for other things to do it. Because unfortunately, if you don't do anything, it's never going to go anywhere. It really isn't. And yeah, they are the big things that I notice for people, that they don't do it. The other things are psychological. Feeling that you forget things, and oh, I'm not learning this, aren't I stupid? I'm really stupid because I don't remember this. Well, no, you're not stupid. You're a human being and you forget things. I forget things. Everyone forgets things. Some people think that they don't. I'm sure they do. But what we tend to do is we tend to be quite mean to ourselves when we talk about, when we think about, what we haven't achieved. So actually, we'll have some really awful voices in our heads saying how stupid we are and how we should know this now, and we'll sort of bang our heads and go, oh, why didn't I know it? But actually, it would be quite weird if you remembered every single thing immediately the first time you heard it. I mean, could you imagine? You'd be on some sort of TV show. I mean, seriously, I can't imagine that I would see things and just know everything all of a sudden. I think for me, it would just be absolutely crazy. There definitely are people out there, and I mean, and I've been through this process quite a few times. So maybe some of you might look at me and say, "Oh, well, it's all right for you. You've done this lots of times." Well, yeah, and that helps to remember certain things, but also it can help you to get confused. That happens too. So the thing with it is you need to sort of find ways to remember the words that you know you'll keep forgetting, and try and be conscious, actively conscious in what you remember and what you don't remember, what you get right and what you get wrong, so that you can go back and correct it. And you may get it wrong 100 times, but it's fine. It's absolutely fine to get it wrong 100 times. It's even fine to get it wrong 1,000 times. If you don't get things wrong ever, then you're an absolute walking wonder, and you should definitely go on TV or something so that we can have a look at you and see how you do it. Share your wondrous ability, because I'm sure I don't have it, and it is normal to get things wrong. The other thing that we get freaked out by is not pronouncing things well. So a lot of people talk about, oh, I want to have a perfect accent or a perfect pronunciation of the language. Well, I mentioned this last time as well. That's not going to happen. Yeah, I mean, if you want a perfect pronunciation of a language 100% of the time, I can tell you now it's not going to happen. It just isn't. So you can forget about that. Just focus on a good pronunciation, because 100% of the time, speaking with a perfect accent, whatever accent is that you choose to try and emulate, you might get close if you're lucky. If you work very, very hard, you might get close, but it's never going to be 100% of the time. It just doesn't, unfortunately, doesn't work that way. And there's always going to be some other things that give you away anyway, so why even bother? I mean, try and get to an accent you're happy with and you feel comfortable with, of course, but the pronunciation is the most important thing for sure. And I say go for that instead. It's a more achievable goal. And some of the pronunciation elements of certain languages will be challenging and difficult, and you will get them wrong, and that's also fine. Just go for it and do what you can and get feedback. Ask people for feedback. Ask them how you pronounce it. Laugh at your own mistakes and what you say wrong. I do. I get things wrong all the time. I still get things wrong in the languages I use at home. I mean, it's normal. If I were to speak perfectly 100% of the time, I think I'd need to be sent off to be studied somewhere. So be kind to yourselves, and I say don't avoid failure. Failure is fine. Failure is normal. Sometimes we fail. We all fail at something at some point. The important thing is how you actually react to that failure. Do you not ever bother again and sort of go and hide in a corner? Or do you want to choose to embrace the failure, analyze the failure, reframe your future, reframe your goals, and move on in a positive way? That's the choice that you have, and you own that, and you can do it. I have no doubt that I have no doubt at all that we can all do that. It's just I say it, and I know it's not as easy as I say. Sometimes it takes, it's hard. It can be hard to do that. But I hope that just explaining it in this way and sharing with you how I view things helps you to see, well, not only is this something that might happen to you, but it also happens to me. And it's something I have to keep reminding myself of as well. So I'm saying these things actually not just for you, but for myself too, because I have to keep telling myself the same things, so that I remember to do that, and I remember to think that way and to act that way and to internalize it myself. So there we go. They're my thoughts on failure. I hope they were useful. And I see there are some questions, so I will do my best to answer as many as I can. Let me see. Hi, Richard. How do you learn new vocabulary? Depends on the new vocabulary. Sometimes I find vocabulary easier to learn or remember because it can be similar to other languages I already know. So I always try and find the similarities to things I already know, whether it's words, whether it's phrases, and I try and associate them to that. That's what I try and do with vocabulary. So it's kind of making mental stories and mental images in my head of what things look like and how things sound and things. And so yeah, that's kind of what I do with vocab. Stories can be quite weird sometimes. The weirder the better, I find. So I mean, you could have a word like, for example, I'm focusing a lot on Estonian recently, and I'll have a word like, let me give a word, hind, Hind, which is a word for price in Estonian, and there, Hind is actually a name of a person that I knew in the Netherlands, so I remember that, and I just imagine an Estonian flag with a price tag stuck to that person's back. I also have other images that I can use with Hind as well. So it reminds me of, so Hind is also the start of Hindustan, which is India. Hindi is related to that word. And so I think of sort of an Estonian price tag on India. I have all of these things to sort of help to reinforce the imagery so that I remember the name, and I also remember the word, and I also remember what it means. So there are a number of things like that that I do. Yeah, I hope that helps. Have you ever had an italki think that your reasons and goals for learning a language are wrong, almost as if they can't comprehend wanting to learn a language as a hobby? Laura, no, usually they're actually I don't think I've ever had anyone say that my goals are wrong or have that feeling that they thought that. They tended to be quite positive, actually. I can imagine that some people, I mean, I've come across people in life for sure who just think, well, why on earth would you bother? I mean, you don't have any connection to it. I've had people react like that, but not necessarily my teachers. I mean, it would be a bit weird for an italki teacher to have that kind of reaction to a student, because that's their job, right? So be a bit weird. But yeah, I'm guessing that you have, if you're asking that question. So it'd be interesting to know what happened and why. So do let me know. So did you attend the certification examinations in German? Which ones? Actually, no. Evangelos, I haven't ever sat. Well, I sat an internal exam at the university in Spain for German, and that was the level that I had to sort of pass to be able to do German as my main language. I was studying through Spanish, and I wanted to have German as my language. I hadn't studied German officially before at school or university, so the level was aimed at somebody who would be, I want to say, like kind of B2C 1-ish level in German, in terms of the oral, the reading, and the listening and speaking that I had to do. It was all kind of, a lot of it was business related because I was doing a business course. But I've never actually sat an exam to get a certificate in German. No, I just worked in German for many, many years and speak it because I lived there. But I've never actually done like one of those levels. The CEFR levels didn't exist when I started learning languages, and they came into play really later on. And the first language that I ever did one of those levels for was Turkish, and I did A1, A2, and B1 in Turkish. Richard, how did you study Macedonian? I'm trying to learn, but I find it a struggle due to limited resources. Yeah, absolutely. It is a nightmare. Learning Macedonian is a pain for resource reasons. This is the book that I used, and it's kind of the only book. Can you see that okay? So yeah, Macedonian, A Course for Beginning and Intermediate Students by Christina Kramer. And that's the book I used. I just went through this book. And what I did was I met with the Macedonian speaker when I learned it. I started studying it in London, and then I went through this with the speaker, and I just practiced the dialogues and the texts and read them out and practiced my pronunciation, and then in sort of started trying to play with the language to use it to talk about my own situation. And yeah, that's kind of what I did for Macedonian. And then I actually moved to Skopje and worked remotely from Skopje, and then I just used it on a daily basis with everyone, including my partner, who's now my wife. But at that time we were just dating. So yeah, I was using it then constantly, but it was kind of, yeah, it was a bit weird doing it from there. There are more materials now in terms of you can access a lot more on the internet in Macedonian than you could when I started. I mean, I've been speaking it now as a home language for, I want to say like 17 years, I think it is, something like that. It's a long time. Hi Richard, I think that I'm a high A2 approaching B1 in Turkish. If my main goal is to be able to understand native audio content in Turkish, what would be the optimal way to spend my time? Wow, okay, good question. So B1 is getting towards being able to really enjoy and appreciate things made for Turkish speakers. Possibly it's more after B1 that you start getting to feel that more. There are some really cool books though for Turkish. For B1, actually, one of them is just under my computer right now, so I can't get it out. But I sort of I raise the level of my computer by putting my books, and I put the Greek and Turkish books underneath, so I can't show you. But there are a few books that you can get. What they're called, oh, I can't even see the titles now, on my word. But there are some cool books that you can get for Turkish to help with your level, and there are also graded readers that you can find. But what I mean, I've been watching Star Trek again in Turkish, so I've just finished all of Star Trek Voyager. After, I mean, this has taken me months. Okay, I don't sit there and binge watch Star Trek, but I just put it on in Turkish and then listen, and then I have the subtitles in English in case there's something I didn't quite get. But I listened to it in Turkish. I actually started off on Netflix just putting the subtitles in Turkish and having in the original language, and now I do it the other way around. I find it quite easy. So sometimes you're actually reading it is quite cool. It's reading the translation I found really useful, and that worked for me very well with Dutch. I learned Dutch very well because of that, doing that, and I thought I'd try it in Turkish too. Τα ελληνικά σου, φίλε μου. Έχεις. Τα ελληνικά σου, φίλε μου. Ναι, εδώ τώρα δεν έχω με ποιον να μιλάω ελληνικά τώρα, γιατί τα σύνορα είναι κλειστά. Δεν είναι κλειστά, αλλά είναι πάρα πολύ δύσκολο να πηγαίνουμε στην Ελλάδα. Αλλά στο χρόνο κανονικά πηγαίνουμε, νομίζω, 4, 5, 6 φορές στο χρόνο, και έτσι έχω με ποιον στη Θεσσαλονίκη να μιλάω ελληνικά. Και τώρα έχω και είναι στο διαδίκτυο, μιλάω ελληνικά με τον κόσμο, και έχω είχα τώρα, δεν έχω τωράκι, αλλά είχα αυτό το χρόνο. Αυτό ήταν για το Β1, το επίπεδο Β1 στα ελληνικά, και το έκανα, και τώρα ναι, θα ήθελα να κάνω περισσότερα με τα ελληνικά μου, αλλά θα δούμε. Για εμένα είναι πάρα πολύ ενδιαφέρον αυτή τη γλώσσα, μου αρέσει πάρα πολύ. Αλλά ναι, αυτό είναι το πρόβλημα, γιατί στα Σκόπια δεν ακούς καθόλου τα ελληνικά στο δρόμο, δεν υπάρχει σαν γλώσσα. Δεν είναι σαν... Έχουμε σερβικά, έχουμε βουλγαρικά δεν έχουμε εδώ, αλλά αλβανικά, τουρκικά, σερβικά και μακεδονικά, αλλά τα ελληνικά δεν υπάρχει καθόλου εδώ. Είναι μόνο στην Ελλάδα, εκεί στη Γευγέλια υπάρχει, και στο ραδιόφωνο είναι παντού, αλλά και ο κόσμος μιλάει ελληνικά πάρα πολύ καλά εκεί, αλλά εδώ στα Σκόπια δεν υπάρχει και δεν μιλάνε. Αλλά μου αρέσει πάρα πολύ και θα ήθελα να μιλήσω πιο καλά, καλύτερα, ναι. Okay. Any times for learning Russian? I speak Serbian already. How should I start with Russian, in your opinion? If you speak Serbian, then you're going to have an easier ride of it with Russian. The program actually I've been using now is Speakly, and that's worked very well for me with Estonian. And so if you look in the description for the video on YouTube, you can see some codes if you want a discount. I don't get anything for that. You just get a discount. So if you fancy using it, feel free. It's actually quite good. It's great to hear your experience. Suddenly, I don't feel as bad. Oh, I'm glad, Mike. That makes me very happy. Have you ever talked to yourself out of learning a language like Portuguese because you are have concerns about interference with Spanish? Yeah, absolutely, Mike. So I always said to myself that I would never learn Ukrainian and I would never learn Belarusian because they're too close to Russian for me in my head. I said the same thing about Slovak. I would never learn Slovak because it's too close to Czech and Polish. But in fact, I actually did study Slovak for a competition in Slovakia, and I spoke it. And then after that happened, I stopped using it, and my Slovak went back into my Polish and Czech, and that was kind of it. Do you think it would be good if I learn Italian and Spanish at the same time? Zara, you can try. I've known people where they've done it and it worked well. I've known other people who've done it and it's been a disaster. This is why I always say try things first, and if it doesn't work, reframe your goals. What I find works for me particularly well is if I do a language that's similar to languages I already speak, and then I do something very different. So doing two languages from zero that are very similar and can be confusing. It can be quite challenging. And if you are doing both, focus very, very heavily on the pronunciation of both. So take a lot of time to get the pronunciation of Italian and Spanish right, because the more differences you can make in your head between the two languages, the easier time you'll have of keeping them as separate languages. Yeah. ¿Te confunde el acento diferente al español? Por ejemplo, el de Argentina. No, está bien, porque yo viví con hispanoparlantes de varios países del mundo, así que para mí hablar con otra gente de otro país sí que no tengo problema, pero igual, pues estudiaba en la República Checa, en Praga, y vivió con gente de Latinoamérica, y también trabajaba en los Países Bajos, con mucha gente también de otro país hispanoparlante, y no tenía problema. Sí, claro, para hablar, por ejemplo, para imitar el acento, no sé hablar de otra manera. Yo hablo el español así, pues sé imitar un poco a algunos acentos, pero no bien en español. Pero lo hago un poco así. Pero no me confunde demasiado para entender, por ejemplo, para nada. Alguna palabra, a lo mejor, de argot puede ser sí que un poco más difícil. Hint is hinta in Finnish. Oh, wow, okay. Hint is hinta in Finnish. So the word for price is the same in Finnish and Estonian. Cool. And late again. Oh, well, hello. Hello. It's good to have you. Been learning French for almost 2 years and trying to get a perfect accent, which is impossible and unrealistic. Absolutely, I agree. So I honestly only do listening in French, which I think is why I fail. Okay, just because you don't get an accent or perfect doesn't mean that your learning is invalidated by that fact. You can get better. Your accent can improve over time, and particularly if you work on it, it can improve. It's just this fascination that I find with people. I find it quite absurd. I mean, I've been speaking French since I was about 5, right? French for me, when I speak it, feels very, very natural. I still make mistakes and I still get things wrong, and I also still sometimes mispronounce things. But hey, I mean, sometimes I'll mispronounce something in English too. I mean, it's totally normal. Sometimes people will listen to me and they'll hear me speak a language for a little bit of time, and they'll say, "Oh, you sound like a native, or you sound like you're bilingual, or something." And it's very nice of someone to say that to me. It's never my goal, though. It's never ever my goal to sound like a native or a bilingual or anything like that. I mean, if people understand me, for me, that's really, really cool. it's very funny as well because it's all very subjective. I mean, if you were to ask the mother and the family in Germany how I sound in German, she would say that I sound English. And she said, "Oh yeah, you've still got the very English accent in German." And then I've got friends who are German speakers who will say, "Oh no, you sound like you like one of your parents could be German." And and then on the internet, people just say all sorts of nonsense. So it doesn't really matter. The important thing is, I mean, I've worked through German and I've done these things, so it's like it works. Like the language I've learned works, and I say do that in French too. I mean, don't worry too much about it. I hate that you worry too much about it. That really, in terms of like just making it a passive thing, don't let that stop you. If you want to speak it, speak it. Seriously, I told a French person off once for being awful about pretending they couldn't understand what someone said. I got really annoyed with them, and I said, "Just try." This person did have a stronger accent, but and at that point, French people weren't that used to hearing foreigners speaking French where I was. But I was like, I can understand what they're saying. Why can't just make an effort and try? Seriously, that's on the person from the country. I'm sorry, but an accent's an accent. That's absolutely fine, and accents can be quite beautiful. This is what put me off Malay, bahasa Indonesia. Yeah, I would not learn Malay. I would probably look at Malay, but I probably wouldn't learn Malay because I've studied Indonesian and I kind of want to have one. I do like the idea of studying Malay at some point, but I think probably it'll stick to Indonesian. Do you have any experience of keeping on top of language learning during a slump, depression? When I'm coming back to life after a slump, it takes some time to get back to where I left off. Absolutely, Jodie. I mean, this again is part of life. It's complete that you are quite normal to have these kinds of experiences. I mean, this is quite a normal thing. It's just that people don't often admit to it, or they pretend, or they put a mask on it. I don't know, but this is quite a normal thing. Absolutely, I've had experiences where I'm not in a place. I had one this year, and I talked about it, about my Korean. I didn't feel like I could carry on with my Korean at that point. I had to reframe things, and I took a couple of months off. And the important thing is, especially with like slumps like you're describing and depression, for example, is to give yourself a break. Right? Depression or any kind of like, it's the same as like, if you break your leg, you can't expect to be running. You know what I mean? It's you've got to give yourself a break and allow yourself to recover and allow yourself the time that you need. And the important thing is, this is where I'd say for our own mental health, what's important is that we acknowledge it, we give ourselves the time that we need to get back on track, we reframe things, whether that's a reframing of the study, the goals, or the time frame that we need to study. Whatever you need, do it. You come first, the languages come after. That's a big thing for me to say, but it's true. It's true. You definitely come first, okay? But it's all about reframing it, and it's about recognizing it actively, not just thinking, oh, I heard that once. Really make a conscious effort to think about it. This is the kind of the game changer. And I hope that you, I hope that that helps with those kinds of periods. And yeah, we all get them. I mean, not all, maybe not every single person, but a lot more of us get them, I think, than we care to admit. And I think it's very good of you to admit that you have those things. So you're already like streets ahead. And it's just being conscious then about being kind to yourself and giving yourself that reframing opportunity and taking the time you need. I'm learning Spanish, German, and Romanian at the same time, but each one is a slightly different level, so they are mostly easy to keep separated. That's brilliant. Yeah, if they're at different levels, sometimes that can make it easier. Okay, why? How did I forget that? Okay. Right now, I'm taking Chinese, Spanish, and German classes, and that's already very expensive. Is there a way to learn more languages spending less? Wow. By the way, okay. Admiro você. Oh, muito obrigado. Yeah, so Gabriel, potentially if you're taking classes, you might want to you might want to look at maybe doing one or some of them as self-study. That can help, and then finding language partners. Languages like Chinese and Spanish, for example, there should be language partners quite easily on different platforms. So I would maybe do that if you want to save money. It obviously you're dividing your time, so 3 languages is a lot and depends on how quickly you want to progress. But yeah, it is possible, and just you need to sort of look at where you're spending your money, how much it's costing, and then which language, and maybe you think that, okay, I've got good resources, I can just do it on my own. Because there are lots of resources for Chinese, Spanish, and German. And the fact that you're because you've written here, oh, I can tell that you're a Brazilian Portuguese speaker. So I would say Spanish is probably going to be an easy one for you to just find materials and start doing it yourself, potentially. But there are also quite a lot of things for Chinese and German. So yeah, that's what I would do. Have you ever used Kindle for language learning? Yep. In fact, that's what I read on. I read on a Kindle. I know Professor Arguelles would kill me, but I do. Yep, it's very, very cool that you're using it as well. I found that really works well for me. I have all my books on Kindle pretty much. I can't carry them around. I find it too heavy to carry them around. Can I speak Persian? No, I can't speak Persian very well at all. No French. Okay, let me see if I've missed any questions. I can see some questions here in the chat. Okay, let me see. Okay, questions. Thought in Italian language. Okay. Do I speak Italian? I think I've seen that one. I can't see any other questions. I think some of the questions are in the comments on Instagram, which are a little bit trickier to see, but I will do my best and go through. Aku dari Indonesia, bagaimana kamu bisa bicara bahasa Indonesia? Ya, bisa bicara sedikit bahasa Indonesia juga. Sesudah di Bali, dan saya sudah bicara dengan dengannya di Bali. So itu bagus, tetapi sekarang nggak ada. Berapa lama kamu tinggal di Indonesia? Sebuat sebulan di Indonesia, dan situ ya 5 tahun yang lalu. Tetapi sekarang di italki ada guru bahasa Indonesia, dan saya bicara sedikit. Saya sudah bicara sekarang sedikit bahasa Indonesia juga, tetapi nggak ada jam untuk bicara sekarang. Saya sudah bicara dengan orang Estonia untuk challenge itu, speakly. Okay. Привет, мой друг. Привет. Nice to see you, Chanel. Your Indonesian is really good. Indonesian is really good. Oh, thank you. I know it's not really good at the moment. I've not spoken it for yeah, for months. I was studying it for a while there, but I've not studied it for months. But I just realized I said it should be satu bulan for 1 month. So yeah, I was in Indonesia for 1 month, and I used it there, but and then I sort of didn't use it again. But I will get back to it. I'm studying Danish now. Are there okay. Any tips for learning it? Well, yeah, with Danish, I actually used the Teach Yourself book for Danish, which I found quite useful. But I have a background in Swedish, so that helped a lot. Okay, go to Jodie Keen's question. Go back up to Jodie Keen's question. Okay, let me see. Did I miss something? Sometimes it feels like one has a deadline to learn a language. How often do you experience people just putting the language journey, putting language journey because they're not fluent within their own deadline? Yeah, sometimes that does happen when you kind of get to a point where you think, oh, I should be able to speak it now, so you give up, or I should be better now, so you give up. I've experienced that with people on courses particularly, and they overestimate the ability of their classmates. They think that their classmates speak it a lot better than they do, and that they're not having the same problems as they are, and therefore want to give up. And I definitely encourage people to actually maybe get out of that frame of mind by actually talking to classmates and seeing what their difficulties are. Sometimes we do have a tendency to think that people will downplay, particularly if they're British, they will tend to downplay things. But what I find is actually a very honest dialogue with other learners is quite useful. So with Korean, for example, I mean, my Korean progress is really, really slow. So in the beginning, I'd hoped that I would be like saying lots of things in Korean by now, and I'm not. I'm really not. And again, speaking to other learners of Korean, I see that a lot of people have this kind of long-term slow burn with Korean, and it is about reframing it. So yes, some people do give up if they feel that they've not met their goals. It's this issue with not reframing, I think, is the issue. You're very welcome. Okay. Let me see. Thank you very much for the kind words. Speak Portuguese. Agora eu não sei. Com você, se você quiser que eu fale português, eu posso falar português, mas você também tem que perguntar alguma coisa em português. Isso é um pouco difícil para mim somente dizer alguma coisa, assim, numa língua. Mas eu sei falar português também, sim. Isso. I love Portuguese. Okay. Mandarin German. Yeah, okay. I think I saw that question. Persian dead. So you would the to flas. Okay, Bob. Persian dead. Unyang na scoop ni the perket un flas the Jewship subsest the Jewadit ktu the keme the maneras na chitet flas Macedonist normal the Jewship the Jew Turkey the permuwers the perchum it's hard but not impossible. Yes. Let me see if I can see any other questions here that I can answer easily. Let's see. You mentioned you started learning languages before the A. Yes, I did. Before those CFR levels, I did, yes. How would you imagine your studies and check your progress? So I mean, we didn't have the CEFR levels, but we did have kind of exams where we had, sort of a description of basic, intermediate, advanced, very rough kind of ideas. And to be honest with you, to be very honest with you, if I show you the back of this book, actually, I just realized that I've got this for this Turkish book. So if you want to learn Turkish, this is quite a cool book resource. And this is from the Yunus Emre Institute. It's pretty cool for Turkish. Okay. So this is the B2 Turkish one, but this is actually just the audio So this is just my CD. But on the back, which is why I picked it up in the first place, you can see the CFR levels, right? And to be honest with you, once you get to kind of an A2 level, you can basically get by chatting away with people. It might not be an amazing conversation, but you can get by chatting away with people. And then the B1 and then to B2, you're sort of starting to get it's pretty advanced. And then C1, C2 really are really quite advanced in the language. But it's weird because you'll meet somebody who has passed their B1 or B2 exam, but they've got like 62%, which is the mark you need to get in your Turkish exam to pass. And then you'll meet somebody else who's passed with 90 something percent or 100%. And it's like night and day. I mean, the levels are very different. So, you know, what you need to know at that level is quite different, right? Türkiye'den selamlar. Selamlar. Makedonya'dan selamlar. Çok teşekkür ederim. Mistakes are overthinking the output, which restricts a potentially quicker development progress. Embracing the mistake as part of the process is, of course, a way. Absolutely, David or David. Absolutely. Absolutely. Great and amazing just joining you in the stream. Thank you very much for joining, David. Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. Okay, I'm trying to see if I can see anything else. How about English? English I learned at home. But I mean, English has probably got the most resources of any language in the world. I mean, it's probably the most studied second language, right? English. There's so much, but you have to find things that you're interested in. Okay, how to improve your speaking by speaking. I mean, you have to use it. You have to keep thinking of things that you need to say. The other key thing is to also start using words. So when you get to kind of this level, like kind of a B1-ish level, B1, B2, it's really starting to use words that you wouldn't necessarily do, using synonyms and using things that are a little bit more challenging. But you have to be very active in doing that. You can't just, it's not just going to happen. I mean, you have to make sort of, if you learn a word, you have to try and use it as much as you can, because if you don't keep using words, they fall out of use and you don't remember them or whatever. It's quite challenging. There's not an easy way of doing it. You have to be active. Soy sombrano desde dónde pueblo. Vaya, imagino. Vaya, muchas gracias. Anya, tú estás ahí. Muchas gracias, Anya. Un abrazo a ti también. Hello from Iran. Hello. Salam. Okay. Okay, any advice for overcoming being discouraged by the German case forms? Yes. Learn what you need to learn in the case you need to use, instead of just trying to memorize like patterns, sort of a table. So I was doing this the other day actually with somebody, and they absolutely, they also found the cases a bit overwhelming. Instead of sort of talking about, learning the sort of daddy das, and then den, die. I can't even do it because I didn't learn German that way. But learning them in this sort of grid is what I see people do. What I always say is remember things that you need to say, like, die Frau mit der Frau, der Mann mit dem Mann, das Kind mit dem Kind. These are the ways that I learned German, because that mit is always going to be, and the thing that really freaked me out with German when I first started learning it, and I remember this very clearly, is that die changes to der in the dative. And when you learn it, so like, okay, die Frau mit der Frau, der Mann mit dem Mann, and it kind of freaks me out a little bit, but it takes time of just using it over and over again. And you sometimes have to force that use so that you can, so you force the usage so that you really get into it and you start using it more and more and more and more and more. That's what I see. But you learn things that you need to say and how they are said, and make a note of it. Be very conscious of when you read or you hear the language, be conscious of how they're using it. But with German, you definitely need to learn the article with the noun. So always learn the article with the noun. Otherwise, it can get very difficult to repair that afterwards. Just because you need them. Okay. Assalamu alaikum. Uzbek tilini ham bisalanmu. So I understand what you said. You're saying hello with the Muslim greeting. Walaikum salam. Okay. Uzbek tilini ham bilasanız. Do you also speak the Uzbek language? Do you also know the Uzbek language? So I understand it because I understand the Turkish. So ham is hem in Turkish. Tilini is dil. Dil is Turkish for, and I'm guessing tili is the language, and then tilini is the language as an accusative, and then bilasm. But I'm trying to think how I would say that in Turkish now. Biliyorsun, biliyor musun? You'd say in Turkish. Do you also know? And Uzbek is Uzbek. So I understand it, and I'm very happy that I can read that. But no, I've not studied it yet. No, it's a yet. Saludos desde China. Soy chileno. Desde China. Oh, chileno. Hola, David. Encantado. A ver. Hi, sir. I have a really strange theory that Turkish people have an advantage over other nations when it comes to pronunciation. What do you think? Because we do not have a strong accent in our... I don't know. Maybe. I don't know. Possibly. It's weird because you have languages where there are lots of sounds, like for example, Swedish has a lot of vowel sounds, but then some Swedes have quite strong Swedish accents when they speak. Even English, I mean, they can sound very Swedish when they speak like this. It's quite Swedishified, if you know what I mean. And the sort of the intonation goes as well. And Swedish has got a lot of sounds. Turkish doesn't have as many sounds, or Turkic languages don't have as many sounds as vowel sounds. Sure, they don't have as many vowel sounds. I don't believe. Let's say from A1 to C2, at what level do you think people should start speaking? I am a start from the beginning. Start speaking when you feel that you want to speak. So I wouldn't. So I don't know. I don't know what you say. Steve Kaufman says, "Don't start speaking until a few months of study." Well, I wouldn't have spoken a word of Estonian if I did that. And I went on TV and did an interview. So, eek. I think it's nonsense. I think it's absolutely nonsense. Just learn. If you want to, if you don't feel like you want to speak, don't speak. If you feel like you want to speak, speak. I mean, honestly, like I would never tell you not to do something. There are people that do very different things than me when it comes to language learning, and they're also successful at learning them. Luca does completely different things than I do. I mean, you know, but he's really, really good. So I'm not going to say, you know, don't follow Luca. It's like, or if what Luca does fits with what you like doing, do it. I mean, if what Steve says about this kind of a silent period and I don't know, not saying anything for weeks or months, if that's you, do you. If it's not you, don't do it. But I would say try and see what feels right for you, because that's the thing. You can. What I would say is that if you don't speak for months and then you put that pressure on yourself, the pressure can build and build and build and build and build and build and build, and it turns it into a real nightmare to start speaking because you think you need to be perfect. And perfectionism, when it comes to language learning, is probably the one thing I would say is one of the biggest killers of motivation. And so avoid it at all costs. Sorry if you're a perfectionist. But you're never going to speak a language perfectly, ever. Not even your own language. You will never speak a language perfectly. It just doesn't happen. No one does, not 100% of the time. It doesn't happen. Sorry, not sorry. Okay. Knowing what you know now, what are the top 1 to 3 things you wish you knew when you were starting out? That I don't have to fit into anybody else's paradigm for what they think I should do is probably the number one thing. I can be me, and it's fine to be me, and I'm quite happy in my own skin, and I can be whoever I want to be, and it doesn't matter what anyone else thinks. That would probably be the first thing, but I learned that quite young. I was quite young. I was always very kind of independent in that way. I was brought up in that way. I just didn't really care. If people had their own things that they wanted to bring to the table to put on me, then that's their stuff, right? You do you. That would be the very first thing, I think. The second thing, and I've never really been bothered about it, is making mistakes, but I never was bothered about making mistakes. I used to laugh at myself all the time, and I still do very often. I make really funny mistakes sometimes, and I love them. In fact, some of the mistakes I make are the best. So they make things more memorable and funnier to tell people about later. So yeah. And I don't know if there's a third thing. Possibly not. Is that not good internet skills to do a third thing? I don't know. Two. Two will do. Two will do. But yeah, do you is the thing that I would say. You do you, and that's important. Knowing what you like and what works for you is really, really key. Because if you're trying to do something somebody else does because they say you should do it, sorry, but I mean, unless you're like them in a lot of ways, it's not happening. Just isn't. Someone could rave about it. I mean, also there are many. Maybe the third thing. Okay, I'll thought of the third thing. Right, there are lots of truths out there. There's not one. There's not always one truth, right? So, what's a great course or a great application or a great book or a great piece of advice for one person isn't necessarily a great thing for everyone else. But it doesn't change that it's great for that person. So lots of things are allowed to be good, and lots of things are allowed to be right for different people. So, for example, I mean, I can say to you, yeah, get this book for Turkish, it's brilliant. Or I could say, you know, I recommended this book before now, or this course, The Click. I've met people who hate this. I think it's the best course for Greek out there. And I've met people who hate it. So it doesn't mean that they're wrong and I'm right. It means that probably we're both right. They're just not the same kind of person as I am for learning a language. Some people hate it when the book is only in the language, the target language, and this course is just in Greek, so it scares people off. And this course is, I think, just in Turkish. I can't remember now because I forget about forget about the languages that are used to teach it. When you get to this level, it kind of doesn't really make any difference anymore because you've got things you can use to read it right and to learn it. Yeah, but that's a good question. I like that. What do you think about learning 2 different languages at the same time? Do it. Go for it if you want to, and see how it goes. Try it out. If it doesn't work, stop. Reframe it. Go back to the start of this conversation, and you'll see what I said about reframing here. Hello, Richard. I'm learning Russian now. Some trouble with the cases. Same advice as for German, Zach. Learn them as you need them. You're my idol. I'm from Thailand. Okay. Kap kun krap. Swedish and Turkish have pitch accents. Oh, Turkish pitch accent. I'm trying to think. We were never taught that. I'd have to have a think about that and analyze it and go through it, but I don't know, or at least read more on it. Swedish, I know, yes. Swedish, I've heard that for. And Croatian as well, of all languages. People talk about it in Croatian, like the kind of tone things. Yeah, I don't fully get it myself, but yeah, I've heard it. Any tips for getting to grips with Icelandic cases? Going through a practical course like the Íslenska fyrir alla is quite a good way, hearing it and using it in a way that you can use it. Because if you start just going, one of my friends actually who taught Icelandic to me at university in Iceland, he's very big on learning the paradigms, because that's what Icelandic kids do. They learn all of the paradigms for the case system. And he said that he swears by that. He thinks it's brilliant. And maybe it does work for a lot of people. He's an excellent Icelandic speaker and wasn't born in Iceland, but he's an excellent Icelandic speaker. And so you can try it, learning them like that. But I always go for a more practical approach for these kinds of things and learn them as I need them, not just for learning them's sake, because otherwise it gets overwhelming with too much vocabulary and too many changes to words. For me personally, have you ever learned Irish? At the moment, I am learning Irish, but I don't speak it yet. Is Mr. Richard? Tá mé Mahoney I Scopianish, as Chester May. Tá mé Posta. I'm trying to think how to say. So I can't remember anything else, unfortunately, at the moment. I know some random words, but that's kind of where I am at the moment. Started about a week ago, maybe, just learning a bit of Irish. It's a lot of fun. I enjoy it very much. Yeah, I'm glad that you're agreeing with the perfection thing. Perfection is never great. It's an impossible thing. It's like trying to find the golden, a golden orb or something. It's like completely, yeah, the holy grail. The holy grail of language learning, perfection, unfortunately. I'm from Persia and I know you from... I know from Maya. Oh, nice to see you from Maya. Thanks for joining. I love you in your videos. Thank you so much. I just thank you very much as well for the very nice comments and feedback. I really, really appreciate it. I'm really bad at doing this, but remember to like, subscribe, follow, whatever it is you do to sort of help the algorithms make it look like I actually say something useful. If you enjoy what I say, then please do. Also, do check out the description on my YouTube videos, because I've got this code. There's a link for italki from the Polyglot conference. And basically what it does is it gives you $10, but then if you use my name, you can also get an extra $5 off your italki lessons. So if you sign up to italki, you can use that and you can get $15 pretty much. So enjoy. I hope that will help if you find a teacher. I'll make a video and stuff on sort of using italki. But yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I've heard that word in Irish, Ron. Yeah, the jellyfish, which is seals. It's hilarious. Okay, thank you all so much for coming, and I look forward to seeing you next week. Please do let me know if you've got any questions, anything you want me to talk about. I'm very open to ideas and thoughts and things. Hope you found this useful today, and good luck with your language learning. It's been a pleasure spending the afternoon with you, and I look forward to seeing you again next week. Take care. Bye-bye.